This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you have been mad enough, kind enough, bored enough to listen to this programme for a number of years, then you will know that it used to be one of my favourite subjects. It feels like a different age, doesn't it? It feels like simpler times. Rarely did I get on a higher horse than when discussing 4x4s and the blight that they impose upon other road users. Well, the good people of Paris have voted to triple the parking fees for people coming into town in one of these behemoths. And Sadiq Khan is reportedly monitoring the scheme to see whether it might work in London, and other British cities may follow. So I think we might have a look at that story a little later in the programme. We'll also be meeting the mother to whom Sadiq Khan apologised. I don't like using first names for politicians. If you ever catch me doing it, then do give me a shout. Apologised for the pollution that caused her daughter's death. A horrible story that has a particularly grim postscript that you won't yet be aware of. We'll be discussing that just before 12 o'clock today. There's also a terrible tale, a really grim tale of anti-Semitism from within the BBC that I want to talk to you about for a couple of reasons, not least because it's a timely reminder of two things. Number one, how virulent anti-Semitism can be, even in relatively ordinary workplaces, and number two, what it actually looks like, as opposed to some of the people who still insist on using the phrase to describe anybody mourning the now 27,000 dead people in Gaza and questioning whether it was really necessary. 5 minutes after 10 is the time. But we begin with phones. I tend not, I think probably because of my own children's age, to go in on these stories quite as hard as I would have done back in the day, and I probably will in 10 years' time. There's just a difficulty sometimes of taking your own mental photographs out of the picture. In fact, a caller said to me, didn't she, on Friday, I don't know if you remember, something about how would you feel if it was your own children, and talking about being the murderer, not the victim, and you sort of balk and so I do think there's a relationship between your own family status, where you are in the context of family, and how you respond to stories involving children of similar ages. I think there has to be. It's like different gears of empathy, isn't it? You can feel sorry for someone, but if it's easier for you to imagine being in their shoes, then you will feel even sorrier for them. And there were two elements of the Brianna Ghey murder that sort of stuck with me over the course of the weekend. The first was quite obvious, the astonishing interview given by her mother Esther, in which she insisted she didn't carry any hate for her daughter's killers, which I don't know what the word is for wondering whether you would be as worthy in the same situation as the person that you're looking at. You hope you would be, don't you? You hope. Well, maybe you don't. Maybe you're quite happy to admit that if you found yourself in this situation, then the culprits would be dangling from the nearest lamppost. But I don't know. I think that sometimes a failure to forgive can poison you, however horrible the tragedy you've endured. But you just don't know, do you? Would you be as forgiving, as amazing as this woman in the same circumstances? I hope you never have to find out, obviously. And the second element was the dark web role in the what would the word be? The journey taken by Jenkinson, one of the murderers, to the point of committing this terrible crime. Apparently developed an obsession with serial killers, and it is reported that she watched videos of torture and suicide on the internet. But you do have to remember that the media is never less responsible than when almost, I'm afraid I would use the word, salivating over a grisly tragedy in the hope of attracting readers. And if you think I'm exaggerating, have a look at Saturday's Daily Telegraph front page, when quite incredibly, they posited the notion in the front page splash, like the biggest story in the paper. They posited the notion that this Jenkinson creature had committed a murder, or at least that she was motivated by a desire to be famous. And then right next to that, there's an enormous photograph of her, which wasn't her mugshot. It was her own social media. It was probably her Instagram selfie. In other words, a photograph in which she, the murderer who wanted to be famous, thought that she looked fantastic. And the Telegraph, someone at the Telegraph either put two and two together and came up with gross, or was too stupid to see the danger that they... Well, anyway, my slightly eccentric attitude to it is that if a teenager kills someone because they want to be famous, don't make them famous. Or at least if you must print a picture of them, and I accept that you must, don't use a picture that they have decided is one of the best pictures of them ever taken. Use a picture of them looking like the murderer they are in a police mugshot. But I digress, and that takes us back to Friday's remarkable conversation, featuring Kelvin, of course, whose mother was murdered in horrible circumstances and who had, therefore, fascinating and deeply powerful insights into that question of whether these people should be named and... Well, we use the phrase named and shamed, but actually, as the Telegraph proved on Saturday, it could possibly be more accurate to use the phrase named and famed. And no, Sarah, as far as I'm aware, the so-called editor of the Daily Telegraph has never explained themselves for the monstrosity of that front page, and it being right-wing media, no one will ever ask them to. But I digress, because the other element of this story that resonates, and the one that has, if you like, travelled into today's news, is Esther's call for social media apps to be banned on smartphones for children aged under 16. And because it has come from Esther Jai, and because it has come in such horrible circumstances, you can't reach immediately for your sceptical levers, can you? You can't reach immediately for almost the poo-poo response to a suggestion like this, which would be getting that particular genie back in that particular bottle is going to be impossible. We owe her, never mind Brianna's memory, at the very least, a proper contemplation of the question. And if there is a conclusion to be drawn that it's feasible, doable, then we'll draw it. But let's begin by acknowledging that it's not going to be a scorched earth policy, is it? You can ban something, but it doesn't stop people doing it. What it does is massively reduce, hopefully, the likelihood of it happening. It massively reduces the number of people doing it. And I can see three stages in this. There's the no social media teenager, then there's the social media teenager, and then there's the dark web teenager. Now, the no social media teenager is much less likely to become a social media teenager if they're not actually allowed to become a social media teenager. They still will, many, but not all, and much, much fewer than would if it was as it is now. And then, of course, the fewer teenagers there are on social media, the fewer would go the next level and start exploring the so-called dark web, where all the apparently gross stuff really, really happens. The stuff that reportedly boiled the brains of the Jenkinson murderer. So those three stages are quite important. And what Esther Jai has said is that we'd like a law introduced so that there are mobile phones that are only suitable for under 16s. Okay, that is what they've said. So listen, there's a boring question to be asked here, and I do want you to answer it, and I promise not to call you boring while you do. But is this even feasible, in your view, technologically speaking? But I'm going to put something else forward, and I'm very conscious whenever we're looking at anything remotely related to parenting. I'm very conscious, and probably more conscious on these conversations than on any others, of smugness. Smug parents. I don't suspect you've ever picked up on this, but I have a capacity for smugness. Perhaps a propensity even for smugness. My colleagues very kindly shaking their heads and raising their eyebrows in shock at the very suggestion of this. But not on this subject. On this subject, I am the opposite, in fact. I am 100% there, but for the grace of God go I. And I don't know why. I think it's probably to do with getting into quite a lot of trouble as a child and knowing that none of it had anything to do with my mum and dad. Quite the opposite, in fact. The various heartbreaks that I inflicted upon them happened despite them providing an incredibly secure and loving home where I was never in doubt of any level of support. And in fact, that level of support was in place even as I was sitting in police interviews and getting expelled from school. So that, I think I've never worked that out before. That's it. One of the few areas of life that we discuss together where I'm not smug is in this area, because I know that the quality of parenting has very little to do with some children getting into trouble. You know what's coming, don't you? I like big butts, I cannot lie. But, power of three, so I've got to do one more. But, could parents be doing more? And can you conceivably, in 2024, tell a 15, and we'll focus, I think, on 15 and younger, can you conceivably tell a 15-year-old that they're not allowed access to the internet via their phones? Can you conceivably and successfully either police, ration, or ban a teenager's access to the internet? Or do you need to be doing more to make them understand? Well, do you need to do more to understand the dangers? Do you need to do more to make them understand the dangers? And do we all need to do more to keep a proper eye on what is going on? Because there are two stories here. There is the story of Brianna, who was very socially anxious. The most poignant element, perhaps, of Esther Jai's testimonies has been the fact that she doesn't think that her daughter saw the final message that she sent. She'd finally got herself out of the house. She was sitting on a bus going to meet people she thought were her friends, and she messaged her mum to tell her how anxious she was, and her mum responded in the most beautiful way. The most beautiful way. I don't know what you know about dealing with children with anxiety, but support and validation at every turn. She responded by saying, "That's brilliant." See, instead of responding by saying, "Oh, you poor thing," you acknowledge that they're in pain, or you acknowledge their anxiety, but you point out how brilliantly they're doing. She said, "That's well good," I think were her words. "You're out there, you're doing it, darling." And that just broke me, actually, when I read that. I thought that was such epic parenting. But of course, at the other end of the social media spectrum, the killers, or one killer in particular, had been using access to the internet to burn their brains in the most hideous of ways. And I'm not making excuses. Listen, if the court and the expert opinion was that had played a role in the process, then we accept that. We don't sit here today pontificating on the existence of evil. So 10:15 is the time. There's the plausibility of it, and then there is I would like to say parents could do more, but I can't, because of that smugness problem. I just don't know how realistic it is for the average parent to have a proper handle on what their teenager is doing on a phone. So those are your two questions really this morning. The first is, can you conceivably control what a 15-year-old is doing on a mobile phone, on their access to the internet, without being a cross between the sort of the Gestapo and the Spanish Inquisition? 0345 6060 973. And then question number two becomes, what have you found? I think this is really important. What have you found? Because I'll tell you something that you may not have realized. You ring me and tell me something that you have discovered, encountered, unearthed as a consequence of going a little bit further than some of your friends do when it comes to policing what your children are up to online. And there'll be somebody listening whose children are doing exactly the same thing and they've got no idea. And they might just go away and check. They might just go away and be a little bit more nosy, shall we say. A little bit more intrusive would be a negative way of putting it, or a little bit more responsible would be a positive. Can you do it though? Because telling a 15-year-old, it's a bit like, you remember when you used to come home from school and tell your mum that you were the only kid in the class that didn't have what would it be, a BMX? I'm the only one in the class that doesn't have Nikes. I'm the only one in the class that doesn't have a space hopper. Showing my age a bit there. But could you really inflict upon your child the shame of being the only one in the class that doesn't have a phone? It's 10:17, so there's actually three questions. The first is this feasible in any way, shape or form? 0345 6060 973. The second question is, can a parent do more? And that, I'm afraid, I am going to ask in a slightly more focused way. I'm going to say, do you do more? And therefore think that other parents should too. And the third question is, what do you do and what did you find? because I'd love to offer full-throated support to Esther Jai and find a way of joining her in calling for some sort of ban on teenagers doing something that currently all teenagers do. But even as I frame those words in that way, it seems a little bit unfeasible, doesn't it? I'm looking forward to talking to you today. The number that you need is 0345 60 973 and the time is 10:18.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10 is the time. Irene's in Lancashire. Nope, you can't police the kids. My great-grandson is 7 and he just asked to be my friend on Facebook. He used his mum's date of birth to set up an account. Adrian in Ashford says, I discussed the ban on smartphones for under 16s with my 13-year-old. And he said you'd have a revolution in the classroom from kids boycotting school and refusing to go at all. I run a tech company, and the quickest, not me, I'm reading a text now, I obviously don't run a tech company, and the quickest and most effective solution would be to introduce Know Your Customer technology to all social platforms. I'll keep that message because there's more of it. I'll keep that on my screen and refer back to it. And Wasim says, as a parent who's had many a battle with 3 kids over phones, as much as I'd love this idea to work, my first thought would be, how can I get around it? And if I can think of a few already, then parents who want an easy life will definitely find ways to get around it as well. 22 minutes after 10 is the time. I'd take Wasim's point and I'd remind you of that adage, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So say that you've got 1 million kids using a mobile phone and you ban it, and it means that there's 10,000 kids using a mobile phone. That's good. That's progress. Not perfect, but good. Tony's in Lewisham. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James.
Hello.
Obviously, I'm just ringing, listening to yourself and some of the things I'd like to highlight at some point.
Go on.
As I told your colleague, unfortunately, me and my partner discovered that my daughter was being sexually abused via a mobile phone.
Oh.
She was 9 at the time.
Oh.
What happened is a friend from her school had introduced her to someone via Instagram.
Right.
And then obviously this person was, unfortunately, a 24-year-old man at the time, which neither of them were aware of. But I was saying to your colleague, the courts took about 3 or 4 years to go through, and eventually he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. And for the whole 3 or 4 years, I blamed myself. Me and my partner, we both blamed each other.
Yeah.
It was our fault. And it wasn't until the day we actually went to court for him to be sentenced I was introduced to a police officer that was working our case. And he expressed to me that his daughter had also been sexually abused.
Really?
And he said, I've read your victim support statements and I can see that you've got a lot of, you're blaming yourself and you're really hurting yourself by doing that. And he said, I'm a police officer and it happened to me. So he said, don't blame yourself. But even now, to this day, I do think partly it was our fault. There's a lot of lazy parents out there, and they might look like amazing parents, because I'd like to think that me and my partner were amazing parents. We discovered it. And we actioned it, and we solved the issue. Obviously, there's been a lot of issues ongoing. My daughter's still suffering now. She can't hold down school. Oh. Her education suffered. We've had no support from the schools. We've expressed everything that happened, and she's really suffered. She's not actually in education now. She's home with my partner. The partner's having to consider giving up her job to homeschool her. But there is a lot of parents out there that think they're switched on. They're not. Believe me, you are not switched on.
I think that's a better word than lazy, isn't it? It's almost a sort of blissful ignorance, if you like. Because I don't want you to think that you were lazy. You clearly weren't lazy. It's a bit like not having the lights on. You just didn't know.
No.
How did you find out? How did you find out, if you don't mind me asking?
What you mean? How did we find out
what was
going on?
Yeah.
Well, to be honest with you, it was only for the sheer fact that I was on annual leave from work.
Yeah.
And she went to school, and her phone was indoors, and me and my partner were just doing housework, and for some reason, I just picked it up. I had an inkling in my mind,
right,
to look, and then I looked and I found it, and I spent the next 3 days pretending to be her to message this bloke. And we called the police. It took the police a week to come out to even take a statement off of us. And in that time, I drove to Ipswich and apprehended the guy. And then Suffolk police picked it up, and Met police, you know, like I said, they turned up about 4 days later.
Roxy's just sent me a report of your story, and that is, I thought that line there was almost unbelievable when you said the police only got involved after the girl's father went to the offender's workplace. Yeah,
so basically I had to go and I felt like I had to go and apprehend him because the police weren't interested.
And then suddenly they were.
Into me. Well, yeah, they were. Yeah, I mean, what they turned up to, they were, you know, they originally I was up for GBH and this and that, and then when they finally realised, but the guy denied it for years, thinking he'd get away with it, and the way they caught him was through his Wi-Fi router at home and at work. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's going on the internet that people need to start waking up to, especially when they're doing it. And your children are a lot smarter than what you think they are. They're good at hiding stuff. They're good at hiding stuff. This girl, it's not her fault. She's been exposed to the dark web. She's looked for it, she searched for it, but then the companies have bombarded her. I
suppose we as adults...
Well, I heard one of your colleagues speaking to Nick Ferrari and talking about the algorithms.
Yes.
You know, you look up a toaster on Google, all you're going to get is adverts for toasters for the next 2 weeks.
Even if you've bought one. So
this girl, the first time
We'll get that phone line back, can we? Because I want to hear the conclusion of what Tony is saying, and I'm reading the details of this story now, and I know he won't mind me telling you because he's shared so much with us already. But it was two girls, as he said, his daughter and her friend, relentless images being sent to them. 2 9-year-old girls, naked pictures of himself, and then asking them to send him similar images back. Go on, Tony. That what you were saying, because I think goodness knows you know what you're talking about on this one. The way in which we should be protecting children from this stuff, but because we don't understand it or know about it, we can't.
No, I believe there's a lot of parents out there that believe they understand and believe they know what's going on. But when you actually, you know, the deeper, like people say, you fall down a hole in YouTube. It's the same with, you know, when you go on the internet, it's unbelievable. You know, I was shocked.
I bet you
I was shocked with the company that, you know, the app that the girls were using. They deleted messages once they were sent. How much of an opportunity is that for someone who's willing to do harm or to expose themselves in a way that they shouldn't?
It's an
Know
invitation.
that there'll be no repercussions.
It's an invitation to criminality.
Yeah,
What?
But look, the one thing I want to make a point. I heard the mother of the victim saying about, you know, phone companies should be doing this, but it's not profitable for them. It's not profitable for the phone companies or for the government. It won't happen. It's down to the parents. It's always down to the parents. You're a parent. That is your role, a parent.
Well, you can say that.
You're supposed to be a guardian.
After what you've been through, you can say that, and it involves, obviously for you, mate, an element of guilt when you say those words. But I don't know.
Listen, I still half blame myself, James. I still half blame myself. I always blame myself that my daughter was exposed to that. There's no words, or no one could tell me anything or ever change my mind on that.
Well, except, and I won't try, but unless you are following everything they are all doing online, and I'll probably get a couple of texts saying, why did she even have a phone when she was 9? But
I wholeheartedly agree. I don't think she should have had a phone when she was 9. But it's peer pressure, and there'd be parents out there that get pressured into it. Like you said about the BMX. Oh, I don't have a BMX, but my mate does.
Yeah.
Eventually, come a Christmas or a birthday, they expect it.
Because you want to see the joy on their face. You want to see the joy on their face.
Happy.
Exactly.
And what we used to do at a certain point in the afternoon, we'd take her phone away from her, and you then got your access to that phone, but it was hidden. It was hidden from us.
Bless her.
And if it wasn't for me having the annual leave and being home in the daytime, I would have never probably discovered it until whenever, I don't know.
Well, God knows what would have happened, because I read that he was introducing the idea of meeting up, wasn't he? So,
he was introducing the idea of meeting up with me, unfortunately for him. James.
Oh, it was you by then, was it?
Yeah, I was trying to coax him to try and find out who he was and where he was.
Well, listen, you don't need to hear it from me, but I think as a dad, you couldn't have handled this better, mate. Once you'd found out what you'd done.
I appreciate that. But I'm just ringing to say,
Be careful.
Like you said, there might be parents listening to this radio show now.
They will.
And they you'd be amazed at what you'll probably find on your children's phone.
There will be a lot of phones. There'll be a lot of phones being checked tonight, and I make no apology for that, and I don't imagine you do either. Before you go, why are you not getting more help with the schooling? Why?
We are. Well,
right.
I meant to look the school. To be honest with you,
yes.
When she started, this happened at the end of year 6.
Okay.
The incident happened at the end of year 6, and then obviously we went through COVID. She went into year 7. Now, to be honest with you, she was having counselling,
yes,
and we said, "Do you want to carry on?" She said, "No, I don't want to carry on because her counsellor changed."
Right.
We should have approached CAMS.
Yes.
But we wanted to send her to school on a level playing field as everyone else because it was a new school.
Of course.
And she didn't know anyone.
Yeah.
So there was no burden for her.
Okay.
A level playing field for her to try and do her best. And I think we failed her by not doing what we should have done, what we're doing now at that point.
Okay, so you are doing it now. You are.
Well, we're trying to, but we've had no support from the school. They don't want to acknowledge it. They don't want to know.
Well, look, if you ever think that a little bit of attention from the media might focus their minds on anything, you just let me know, all right? But I'm not going to go in with my size 10s
I appreciate that, James. Thank you very much. I appreciate your kind words.
Well, hardly. It's the least anyone would do in the circumstances. And thank you for really hearing every syllable of what I said at the beginning of today's show about the possibility of you listening to the programme, having gone through something that every other parent on the planet will probably never forget hearing, mate. I only wish you weren't in such a position to make such an extraordinary contribution. Take care. Love to all of you. 10:32 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:37 is the time. This text is asked to remain anonymous. I'm worried sick about my niece who's been bought an iPhone for her 7th birthday. Some parents have no idea what's safe and what's not for their kids, so the state has to step in. IDs get checked to set up a contract so an ID can be entered that allows internet access. I know the system will be played and workarounds will happen, but don't let, as you say, the perfect be the enemy of the good. Phones for kids with extremely limited access could work, but aren't available widely as far as I know. I think you can get SIMs, can't you, that have limited, obviously, with limited access. Gosh, I'm going to play you a little clip, actually, because I think when Tony there, deeply impressive, but you can understand why he's so hard on himself, despite, in my opinion, having done everything he humanly could and more than many of us would. In that horrible situation. But when he talked about the ease with which people up to and including Brianna's murderer could fall down a rabbit hole, it doesn't mean, obviously, that everyone who encounters certain material is going to end up being a child killer. But the idea of extending understanding even to people who have done the most disgusting things, or in this case, the parent of someone who has done the most disgusting things, it's so impressive. So we live in a society that seems sometimes to almost encourage a refusal to try to understand things, which is why I found these words yesterday from Esther Jai so almost unbearably powerful.
We haven't come face to face, but like when I think of their emotions and how they're feeling, it just brings back how I felt when all this happened in February, because yeah, she looks completely broken, really, and rightly so. She's going through an absolutely horrific time.
Is there anything that you would want to say to her?
I think that I would like to say that if she did want to contact me and she does want to speak, then I'm open to that. I'd like to understand more how their life was and what they went through, and I also want her to know that I don't blame her for what her child's done, and I also want her to know that I understand how difficult being a parent is in this current day and age with technology and phones and the internet, and how hard it is to actually monitor what your child is on.
I don't actually know what the word is. It's more than generosity, isn't it? Or kindness or forgiveness. But for the mother of a murdered girl to speak like that about the mother of the murderer is extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. 20 to 11 is the time. Back to the phones and the multiple questions thrown up by partly by what you've just heard. Liz is in Manchester. Liz, what would you like to say?
First of all, I think this story is very sad. And I think to try and stop young children on social media is going to be really hard. I think there is a lot of negativity around it. I've had a daughter that's been bullied by social media.
Tell me about that, Liz, because some people might, they won't be entirely sure what that means and why it's different from being bullied in other ways.
Because it's someone literally sitting behind their phone at home, making nasty comments, sending nasty pictures, and finding someone's weak point. But because sometimes this can be made anonymous, you don't know who that is doing around you. So you can see a message come up and it can be very hurtful, so much so my daughter decided to cut herself. She really found it very hard.
Yes.
It's really knocked her confidence severely. It's last year was just such a horrible, horrible time for her. And as a parent, you kind of think, what can I do? How can I help? I think one of the biggest things is, if I tried to tell her, come off social media,
yes,
take a step away, but then also it's kind of, as the saying goes, the devil you know. So if she sees what's going on, she's prepared for it if she was to go into school. Because
other people see it. Is that the point? It's not a one-on-one communication. Other people see what's happening. So when she goes into school, forewarned is forearmed, isn't it, really?
Yeah, very much so. But then on the flip side, you can communicate with people that are going through a similar feeling,
of course,
or they feel isolated because of one thing or another. So it's and there's lots of advice and tips on different websites. So as much as I think girls in high school are utterly cruel, and you sadly enough you do hear about suicides. You kind of think at such a young age, it's awful, and it's so awful for the parents. And you don't know who it is, or you suspect who it is. You think it's one? You can suspect who it is. There's nothing. And what does the school do? Is the school any use? No, not really, because it's out of school hours, and also because schools have got so much to do at the moment. This isn't an excuse. I'm just thinking, what as a head teacher who's wondering how you're going to pay the gas bill next month, and you've got shortages in the common room. The idea that you also take responsibility for this as well is it's a big ask. How is she doing now, Liz? She's not too bad. Good. She's getting there, but it's like a step forward, a step back, two steps forward. But it's just building a stronger person, but also in respect of, yes, fine, she does have the phone, she does have social media, but she's sensible with it. And I'm very kind of open with her, and she's open with me. So I think sometimes with parenting, we think, are we doing the right thing? Should we do this? Should we do that? But I think if you can have that kind of relationship where they can come to you because you're being open and honest with them, and they feel to come to you and being open and honest, rather than if you put the shutters down and say, right, you're not having this, you're not having that, then they're probably going to do it behind your back, and then you will have no clue of what's going on. And that, and which is no criticism. That's the problem, isn't it? Because I'm automatically now worrying about the children who don't have that kind of relationship with their parents, or don't have parents who would nod along, would agree with what you're saying, because arguably they'll be the ones, or don't have a dad like Tony who's going to check their phone when he's tidying up the bedroom. There's just so many variables, and the longer the conversation goes on, the more I do think, although I appreciate it's expensive and very difficult, that it might be a problem that needs to be fixed at source. If you don't introduce measures that make it much, much harder for people under a certain age to access your services, then we will fine you billions of dollars, If this government did it, they could plug some of the holes left by giving enormous contracts to their mates in
in other businesses for flogging them dodgy PPE. I mean, I'm not being silly. I'm just thinking it's not that hard to impose epic fines upon companies for epic misdeeds. And this could be quite an easy way, perhaps, of addressing some of these problems. It is actually, just on a lighter note, and for me at least an uplifting note, we're talking about childhood, and some of the stories we've heard make us think not only of our own children, if you have them, or children you may have one day, or children you've got that are, already drawing their pension, but your own childhood as well. And there's an element. Do you have something from childhood that is almost? It's like the writer Marcel Proust talks about madeleines. Those little cake stroke biscuits. And when Proust writes about a madeleine, it's as if it's like something out of Doctor Who. He takes a bite out of a madeleine and he's back in his childhood state, in a way. I've got a couple of those. There's a particular smell of floor polish that makes me immediately transport back to my old headmaster's, the corridor outside his study where we would queue up waiting to be beaten. That's not a very happy memory. That's no cake. But there's another one I've got. Where if I remember this thing in Kidderminster where I grew up, in some ways it is almost like the essence of my childhood. And quite remarkably, I've just had a message off the son of the man who has passed away, the son of the man who was responsible for one of the most memorable elements of my childhood in Kidderminster. I'll tell you a bit more about that after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
The time is 10 minutes to 11. It's, this is very much niche news, but I've had a lovely message off a chap called Richard Hand, whose father, Peter, has died aged 95, and who was a sculptor. He worked as a teacher as well, a lecturer at Bournemouth College of Art. But when I was growing up in the local shopping centre just outside Waitrose, there were two fiberglass swans. One of them had a step inside that you could climb up and down, and one of them had a little slide that you could slide down. And it just struck me as a timely moment for Richard to get in touch with a reference to a lovely obituary that he's written for his father in The Guardian, because we need a reminder that childhood is supposed to be a time of happiness and innocence, and clambering around on those swans with my sister and any other kids whose mum was shopping in Waitrose is truly one of the probably one of the simplest and happiest memories of my child. We loved them. I don't know why. They were just flipping fun. They weren't even very big. Big enough for a child to climb inside, but not an adult, which on reflection was probably deliberate. 10:51 is the time. Back to these questions and of course your answers. Ben's in Plymouth. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, so I was a police officer for 10 years in Plymouth, and some of that time I worked with child sexual exploitation.
Oh, Lord.
And social media. So it actually ties in with my niece as well, because one of the schools I worked at the most, she went to, and it was an all-girls school in the middle of Plymouth. And the problem is these kids were travelling from all over the city to go to this school.
Right.
And they would get caught up in these gangs. And these gangs would have these girls that were 17, 18, that would be honey traps. And they would get pictures of these girls. They promise them the world to get these pictures, and then they're trapped.
Yes.
If they don't do what they're told, these pictures are shared throughout. And my niece, she's 17 now. Luckily, she never got caught up in any of that. But she's got depression. She's got an eating disorder. And part of that is what I think is a massive generational gap. Her mum, which is my sister, brother-in-law, they don't know anything about Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. And I remember my niece was 10 when she first got Instagram, and my sister was like, oh, don't worry, we've made it all private in that. And then one day my sister said, oh yeah, Harry Styles follows her. And I said, no, he doesn't.
It's highly unlikely, Mum.
Exactly. I've got a daughter that's 8.
Right. What do you do? Because it must be tough. No, I mean, you can't not bring it home, can you? But I mean,
no,
you can't lock her in a box.
No, exactly. So
what do you do?
Her iPad is set up for an 8-year-old. It's set up with her account, and her date of birth is on that account. That stops her from downloading any apps that aren't within her age. Because, I mean, if you go into the App Store, they have all got ages on them. And part of that, because we've created an Apple family, I can see everything she looks at on the internet.
For now you can, but as soon as she wants to access the social.
Totally.
What are you going to do when her mates are all on Snapchat?
Well, this is it. She already has a friend who has Snapchat in her year. She's in year 3.
Good Lord.
And the only bit my daughter's seen of Snapchat is the silly faces you can pull using the filters on it.
Sure.
But I've seen parents be called in because of what kids are talking about on Snapchat. This is in my daughter's school in her year group, so her age between 7 and 8. They're being called in because of.
So what do you think you'll do?
Do
you know? Have you given it any thought?
But like your last caller, being open and honest with my daughter, and that's the way forward we have to be. But I think there has to be, parents need to have, I don't know whether it's training, or they need to have more knowledge.
I think training's a good word. I mean, again, you worry about the ones who wouldn't accept the training or wouldn't turn up for the courses, whether they were online or whether the schools were running them or whatever. But the point is, you're trying to chip away at a problem. You're not going to be able to solve it. You can't really solve any problems. But the idea that parents need to know more, and or companies need to do more, and that combination, somewhere between those two positions lies improvement, if not resolution. I missed this. I didn't buy the Observer yesterday, but I'm delighted to see Carol Cadwallader's byline back in the newspaper. One of the most fearless people, never mind journalists, I've ever had the privilege of knowing, and she, of course, knows more than almost anyone in this country about what algorithms can do on the internet with regard to persuading people to act against their own interests. Something she discovered when looking into the Cambridge Analytica scandal and the use of illegally gathered data to influence votes. But she's turned her attention again on Mark Zuckerberg, who's been giving evidence before Congress in America on this, and she writes very powerfully. A genuinely standout moment of awkwardness in which Zuckerberg was forced to face victims for the first time ever and apologise. Stricken parents holding the photographs of their dead children lost to cyberbullying and sexual exploitation on his platform. Less than 6 hours later, his company delivered its quarterly results. Meta's stock price surged by 20.3%, delivering a $200 billion bump to the company's market capitalization, and, if you're counting, which as CEO he presumably does, a $700 million sweetener for Zuckerberg himself. Those who listened to the earnings call tell me there was no mention of dead children. So, parents, yes. But my goodness, I think that people like Mark Zuckerberg could do a hell of a lot more. One of the grimmest things you'll find if you start looking into this stuff, there's a brilliant documentary on Netflix, and the number of senior Silicon Valley figures who preside over and benefit from these platforms do not let their own children anywhere near them. Just think on that for a minute. And also think for a minute about the kind of people like Andrew Neil who've queued up over the years to attack Carol Cadwallader for telling the truth about what goes on the internet. And, I don't know, maybe ask yourselves why. Jess is in Southampton. Jess, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm one of those parents who doesn't let my kids have anything.
How old are they? 43, James.
So my son's going to be 12 soon.
Okay, so coming right into it
in
then.
Year 7. Yeah. And he got his first, non-smartphone to go to secondary school. And so we've done that. That's what we've done. We've limited everything. They don't have iPads. He has a console, but not in his room, and he's only allowed to play it on the weekends. Really, we keep it really strict. But he's definitely suffered socially because of that.
He's out of loops.
Yeah.
Does he hate you?
Not.
More than the average.
I don't think.
No, but I mean, he can't be over the moon about it.
No, I think I've spoken to him a lot. So my husband's head of safeguarding at a really large secondary school.
There it is.
And so, yeah, exactly.
I mean, you could end it there. You could end it there, really, Jess, couldn't you? That's the sort of full stop, really. And so.
I would say, yeah. Just going back to what a caller said before, I can tell you categorically that schools try so hard, but it's just an endless task.
Yeah.
And what happens, and what has happened recently in the school that my son goes to, is parents do refuse to let the schools search bags.
Yeah.
and search phones, which, you know, I get from a privacy perspective. I do get that people think it's an invasion of privacy, but it's a reversal of authority, isn't it, that's happened over the last 20 or 30 years, is that you have, where parents would once have sided with teachers in most circumstances, now they side against teachers with their own children, up to and including things that are for the child's good, for the child's own benefit. Yeah. So he did search phone. It was last year sometime. He did search phones, and he found there were 2 videos of people committing suicide that had gone round to 150 year 7s. So, you know, like, and unless they're allowed to do that, and I don't do it very often actually, but I did reply to somebody on Facebook who was complaining about the school that my son goes to,
right,
wanting to search a bag and saying that she was going to tell her kids to refuse to let them. I was like, yeah, well, exactly, because it's an invasion of privacy, and when I said they can search, you know, being in the situation I'm in, they can search it 3 whatever
Did you tell
time
them
they
about
want.
Did you tell them about the videos your husband found?
Yeah.
What did they say?
And well, my child won't get involved in that.
No, but what did the person on Facebook? Did you tell them about the videos your husband found?
Yeah, and they said my child won't get involved in that. My child wouldn't.
Okay.
Well,
that's another phone-in.
Kind of
I'm late for the news, Jess, but that's another phone-in that we must have. I'll make a note on this. The way that parents resist what is good for them, deny, and that's a really interesting insight. My child wouldn't get involved in anything like that. It's almost like an epitaph. Jess, thank you. In the next hour, it's a bit of an old one, this, for me, but it's come back round again for the most fascinating of reasons. Why 4x4s, Chelsea tractors, call them what you will. Why I fully agree with the people of Paris that we should price them all off the roads of our cities.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11. That reward, I actually nearly tweeted something yesterday and then I deleted it because I thought perhaps I was being a little bit stupid. The £20,000 reward for this suspected chemical attacker. I wondered whether it would also be helpful for the Metropolitan Police to reveal the punishment that you will face if you help him. A bit of stick to go with the carrot. But then I thought, actually, maybe that would, if people are helping him, maybe they'd be less likely to dob him in if they. Do you see what I mean? So I deleted I didn't send the tweet, but I've been puzzling over it all weekend. It's a horrible story. Which, of course, for those of us who routinely point out the iniquities of our asylum system, it proves that just like almost everything else in this country, austerity, cuts, distraction tactics used by politicians, if you've been convicted of a sex offence, then your asylum application should be dead in the water immediately. That seems a matter of complete obviousness. But the problem is, where do you put someone after that process is over? Attempts in some corners of the media to turn it into a conversation about asylum rather than a conversation about violence against women. If you encounter anybody claiming that it's more about asylum than it is about violence against women, a particular type of violence, a particularly hideous and misogynistic type of violence, it's a variation, a chemical attack on the, well, if I can't have you, no one else will, school of misogyny. But if you do encounter anyone saying it's more about asylum than it is about, I think this was the point that Gillian Keegan in her clumsy way was trying to make. If you encounter anyone saying it's more about asylum than it is about violence against women, then just ask them why we're talking about asylum. Okay? Because the answer to that question is violence against women. So some people need a little bit of help on occasion, seeing what is directly in front of them. But we'll probably talk in the next hour about one element of that story that is definitely not black and white, and that is the role that religion should play in refugee status. There was a time when Christians celebrated whenever a new convert was invited into the fold. But whether or, well, we'll talk. I think we're going to talk about that in the next hour. I'm not 100% sure because there is a lot going on. I'm getting sent so many messages, I have to tell you, from people, including from people I know, who have stories not quite as harrowing as Tony's, who kicked things off in the last hour with the tale of his 9-year-old daughter discovering that his 9-year-old daughter was in receipt of explicit photographs from and being groomed by a grown man, happily now jailed, but after something of an odyssey for the entire family that is far from over. But the number of other people that are sending me messages with similar stories or comparable stories is remarkable. As is this story, because I could get very excited about this. 54.55. I don't like referendums. I think in the absence of a truly fair media, referendums are not conducted democratically. And by democratically, I mean you can only offer an informed opinion on a subject if you have been informed. And as we have discovered in this country in recent years, it's very easy, or perhaps possible, to win a referendum by deliberately misinforming a population. But 54.55% of voters in Paris have approved a steep rise in parking rates for SUVs in the capital. It's going to triple rates for any car weighing 1.6 tonnes or more. So to park for the afternoon is going to cost you about 225 quid. You're looking at 18 euros or 16 quid, $20 an hour in a Paris. So if you want to park in Paris for a decent length lunch, and the French measure their lunches in hours, you're looking at $100. And I love this story. There are exemptions if your car is fully electric, if you're driving a taxi, if you're a tradesperson, a health worker, or a person with disabilities. But guess what the turnout was? Guess what the turnout was? It's actually hilarious. Especially if you're an SUV driver, spitting nails this morning. What's the French for spitting nails? I don't know. Someone will tell me in a moment. Well, I can't remember it. No, that's naughty. Méchant is naughty. What's cross? What's the French for cross? Je suis très something aujourd'hui. Je suis furious. The turnout was 5.7%. Listen, I said I wasn't a fan of referendums, and I am a fan of this result. But my goodness me, you can't introduce a law on. Can you introduce a law on a 5.7%? I suppose that people have only got themselves to blame. I don't understand how that can happen mathematically. Well, I mean, seriously, I thought people would care very passionately about it. So I presumed, as I looked at the story, without digging into the detail, I presumed that there'd been a detailed and concerted campaign among environmentalists conducted by enemies of these ludicrous behemoths to drive them off the streets of Paris. But no, 5.7% turnout. That's probably what you'd get if no one knew about it. And the only people that voted in a referendum were people who were just walking past the voting centres and said, what's going on in there? Aujourd'hui dans la. And someone said, it is a referendum on the SUVs. Would you like to come in and vote? You'd get 5.7% just on passers-by voting in a referendum. So it's perhaps not quite as exciting as I initially thought. Well, it is, because it's a result. It counts, 52-48 is a win, regardless of turnout. There is no threshold below which. I was in Nottingham at the weekend. I had a wonderful time at the Nottingham Playhouse, which I urge the authorities to keep open. And thank you to everyone who came along. We had a beautiful, beautiful time, and in Wolverhampton the previous night. But I sometimes play a little game when I'm in a city of working out whether it would have voted Remain or Leave back in the referendum, because I think, as a great advocate of the contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned, I think that having a very strong sense in your hometown of decline and of greater days being behind you, I think that was a driver of the Leave vote, a perfectly understandable driver of the Leave vote. I discovered it first in Ramsgate. And around Ramsgate and Yarmouth and places like that, where in Victorian times these resorts were glamorous. You go around, particularly Ramsgate, Margate, that bit of Kent, and some of the hotels would have been run by the equivalent of Michel Roux. Famous French chefs would be working in the dining rooms because no one went abroad. So the great and the good, the gentry, the wealthy would go to English seaside resorts, and you can still see the vestiges of those glory days. Whether it's a sort of a wrought iron bandstand that's gone to ruin, or even an ornate bus shelter. It's as if it's as if there's a land of milk and honey bubbling just below the surface of urban decay and youth violence and deprivation and damage, and there's now graffiti on what was once a beautiful pavilion. It was actually quite an important moment for me in having sympathy for people who actively voted to turn us into the first population in history to impose economic sanctions on on itself. You have to, if someone does something you don't understand, you have a responsibility to try to understand it. And the seaside towns were a great way of doing that. But I got Nottingham wrong. I thought Nottingham would be Remain. I don't know how much revitalisation has gone on since 2016. It was a narrow vote for Leave, but I was struck by turnout. Turnout was about 60%, which I think was about average across the country. And I do wonder how many people who just presumed it would go one way didn't bother voting as a result. But if 60% is worryingly low, 5.7% is a pittance. But it doesn't change the facts. And the facts are these, albeit that they have now become utterly endemic. And I don't have any particular beef with you if you drive one, but I think the idea of removing them from the streets of our major cities by charging people absolute fortunes to park is brilliant. I think there are few acts of selfishness more complete than driving around cities built for horses and carts in a vehicle the size of a Chieftain tank. And there's no other way of doing it. I don't want to take your car away from you. I don't want to ban you from driving the car, because that wouldn't be fair. I fully accept that this is unfair on less wealthy people, but if you can afford to drive one of these monstrosities, then you are unlikely to be visiting a food bank anytime soon. So if you want to park your car in town, then just get a better job or cancel your Netflix subscription. That is how it works. Remember, if you're poor and can't make ends meet, then the political rhetoric, the right-wing rhetoric, is that it's all your fault and you should start using the value aisle of your local supermarket. But why? Why do people still drive these massive vehicles that cause a huge problem? Sometimes, when I'm on the bus, on you know the roads where people are allowed to park on the pavement, the residential areas where people are allowed to park on the pavement. Sometimes when I'm on the bus, we have to stop. There's traffic coming in both directions, and it's very tight. But if someone's got one of these SUVs parked on the pavement, it pokes out, say, 6 inches more than the other vehicle does, and it means the bus actually has to stop and wait for the cars right at the other end of the street where the parking on the pavement area begins. You have to wait for a driver to stop there so that the bus can then move forward and go. So you clog up roads. You massively increase the risk of injury. You endanger cyclists. There is absolutely no plus. If you needed to find the essence of vehicular selfishness, it would be one of these cars that makes you feel like the king of the road. I've been in one in the passenger seat. I fully understand the appeal. You feel like the king of the road and stuff everybody else. So I love the idea of tripling. I think triple the congestion charge on them. Triple the ULEZ charge. Price them off the roads. Leave them as the preserve of the super wealthy. Go out and buy yourself something that is both more environmentally friendly and less likely to mess up or disrupt the day of everybody else. Now, it's 11:15. I don't do motoring subjects very often. There is a very important subtext to this conversation, which I'll share with you shortly. And it involves Sadiq Khan joining the very short list of politicians who has offered a full-throated and sincere apology to somebody for something over which he did arguably have some control. It was Ed Davey last week. It's Sadiq Khan this week. But if you drive one, do you know? This is what I'm interested by. Because you remember when the environmentalists stopped traffic, and it's very popular to say, imagine if an ambulance couldn't get through. Well, imagine if an ambulance couldn't get through because you're driving a Chieftain tank down Brentford High Street and everybody else on the road has to make way for you. I'm fascinated to know, and you might not want to tell me, and we won't fall out because you're allowed to drive them and no one can blame you for doing so. But when you're in them, are you aware of how selfish you are? Do you change when you get behind the wheel of one? Do you start off thinking, I'll buy it because it's safer, or I'll buy it because I want the neighbours to think I'm doing better than I really am, or you buy it because, you're making up perhaps for deficiencies in other areas, and you think that having a big car might distract you from your embarrassment over, I don't know, being small somewhere else. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. What is the... So you buy it for a variety of reasons. When you first get behind the wheel of it, you're a decent person. And suddenly you feel yourself changing. Special prize to the first person to ask about Sadiq Khan's Range Rover today, which, of course, as he's explained a million times, he has to have because of the terrorist threat and the death threats under which he lives almost constantly. But I'll tell you what, can we start warming up a seat in Idiot's Corner for the first person who brings Sadiq Khan's Range Rover into it, despite the fact that it has been explained. In fact, when a Conservative MP said he was stepping down because of death threats, it made the front page of the Daily Mail. But when Sadiq Khan explains he has to use a vehicle that he hates because of death threats and terror threats acknowledged by the Metropolitan Police, the Mail attack him. Isn't that funny? I'd never noticed that before. Admittedly, we're talking about the same newspaper that put the sentencing of Joe Cox's white supremacist terrorist killer on page 30. But on the front page last week, they had the tale of an MP who says he's standing down partly because of threats he's received for being supportive of Israel, which is disgusting that he's stepping down. And the threats are absolutely appalling. But how can the same newspaper be so sympathetic to one politician facing death threats that they put his plight on the front page of the newspaper, and yet attack another politician facing death threats because he has to use an armoured car for quite short journeys in order to abide by the advice he's receiving from the Metropolitan Police? I don't know. It's a funny one, isn't it? 18 minutes after 11 is the time. Why do people drive these cars? And how do we feel about pricing them off the roads? Now, I would like, still quite early in 2024, I would like to have an interesting phone-in about motoring, because this is something that I do actually feel quite strongly about. What do you reckon? 0345 6060 973. Can we have an interesting phone-in about? I used to do this all the time. I used to be obsessed with this subject. In fact, I bumped into a bloke from school that I hadn't seen for 20 years, mentioned what I do, and I thought quite condescendingly or patronisingly, he said, "Oh yes, I've heard that a couple of times. You talk about 4x4s a lot, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I talk about all sorts of things. Why are you And then I thought, no, he's actually got a point. I have got a bit of an obsession." But this is 10 or 15 years ago. So what's going on? What is the appeal? And why shouldn't the rest of us price them off the road? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 11. You put me in a horrible position now. I'm going to sound disableist or ableist, but I have already said there is an exemption for people with disabilities and their families. So, if you've got a disabled badge in your vehicle, then this will not apply to you. So apologies, but this isn't a phone-in that you need to worry about. And I need the phone lines for people that drive these ludicrous Chelsea tractors for reasons of, I don't know, personal inadequacy in other areas, or just a sort of blithe selfishness. I was slightly out on the centimetres. The average new car is 180 centimetres wide, 200 if you include mirrors, whereas one of these SUVs is about 200 centimetres wide, 220 if you include mirrors. So roads built for donkeys in some cases, but for small cars. Remember your dad's car? Remember when you were growing up, bombing around in a Renault 5 or a Morris Marina? The roads that could cope with those vehicles, or a Toyota Yaris if you're slightly younger than me, imagine if you've got two of these vehicles, that's 40 centimetres that you've lost for cyclists or for other. I just love the idea. I just think that it is a neat recognition of progress and change that could be both accommodated and delivered. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. Jack's in Southam. Jack, what would you like to say?
Well, hi. I actually design these cars for a living.
What, the big ones?
The big ones.
Okay.
I'm personally not a fan of them, however.
Well, I don't want you to get into any trouble with your employers.
Oh, I won't tell you where I work.
Very good. But they might recognise your voice, Jack.
True.
Could you do maybe you should do a French accent.
Oh, I don't want to offend too many people.
No, I'll do that later. Don't worry. So, sorry, crack on. Talk to me about your feelings.
So I think the problem is, what is an SUV? Because we have this discussion at work. Most engineers don't like large SUVs anyway, because they don't fit our sort of criteria for what's a good car. But we're a peculiar bunch in that sense.
You mean lines and aesthetics and things like that? You want to design something that looks beautiful, not something that looks like a Tonka toy.
Yeah, that, and also, performance and all the boring car person.
It's not boring.
Stuff.
Environment, well, maybe not environment.
Yeah. No, but also fuel economy and stuff like that. Like, I could use one in my personal life, but I don't have one because I don't want to pay for all the fuel.
Yeah.
I cycle a lot, and I would support many measures that make roads nicer for cyclists and all that sort of stuff.
The criteria in Paris is 1.6 tonnes.
For which you could get probably quite a few electric cars are over 1.6 tonnes. I know they're excluded, but
no, they are. They wouldn't be under my glorious rule, by the way. I'd go for width as well, not just weight, personally. But I don't want quibbles, Jack. I don't want quibbles. We're discussing principles. In principle, pricing these behemoths off the road, even though you design them, I sense you might be in favour of.
Yes, but I would be more broadly in favour of actually getting more cars off the road generally, to be honest. Most of us don't need to drive most of the journeys we drive. Particularly if you live in a town or city, you can get a bus, you can cycle, you can walk.
Well, you don't need to tell me that.
Convenience.
I travel exclusively by public transport unless Mrs. O'Brien is driving me somewhere. Is this the sound of a turkey voting for Christmas?
No.
Are you sure?
Because I think it's just a fashion, isn't it, really? And eventually, when people become more and more eco-conscious, it will just change. And
no, but I meant, are you saying fewer and fewer cars, trying to get more and more cars off the road, full stop?
No, because I think more. I think if you need a car at all, you need a car, right? But do you need to use it to go to work every day? Probably not.
I see what you mean. Yes, so you want everyone to be like me. There's a car in the drive, but you hardly ever use it because you use public transport to go everywhere, and increasingly cycle lanes. And albeit I understand that you would like something that addressed all vehicles, I think in the context of the amount of road that these monsters take up. What do you say, personality characteristic of the kind of people that drive them? Not all of them, but what would you say distinguishes them from someone who, for example, just drives a nice Volvo?
Not a lot, to be honest, a lot of the time.
How dare you? No, they're profound differences, Jack. Seriously, 27 after 11 is the time. Andy's in Camberwell. Andy, what's going on?
Hello, James. I'm a truck driver, and I've regularly come across the biggest issue is honestly people with these cars not parking properly.
Yes.
The amount of times I do skips, so I'm regularly having to knock on doors to get people to move their cars out of the way and everything anyway. But the amount of times I have to have a conversation with people to be like, come and have a look at how you've parked. You've double parked about a mile away from the curb to save your alloys. If there's a fire at the end of the road, how's the fire engine going to get down? How's the ambulance going to get down the road? I literally had to stop a police officer in a bully van the other day to have this conversation with them. And just the arrogance on people's driving these days is just absolutely unbelievable. People haven't got a clue about the size of their vehicle.
Driving and parking. I don't quite understand that. As you've probably gathered, Andy, I'm not what anyone would call a petrol head. But how can you not realise how big your car is?
I think they do. I think it's honestly just egotism and arrogance, mate, because it's like I say, there's been a move. I used to do alloy wheel repairs as well before I was a truck driver. There's been a move to switch everybody's wheels to diamond cut, like these two-tone things that everybody thinks is good, but it costs £95 a wheel to get that repaired for the curb rash, whereas a painted wheel costs £30 to get repaired.
So you think people are parking in the street so that their wheels don't scrape the curb?
Yeah, literally. I'm sure this is the only reason because most of the time the excuse is to give them for it.
But the average mum on the school run has got fancy wheels.
Honestly, I don't mean to be rude, but they're some of the worst offenders.
And you think it's to protect their... I can't even believe I'm saying this phrase out loud. This is why I don't do motoring phone-ins. You think it's to protect their alloys?
100%, because because everyone's on hire purchase now or finance. You now get charged for any damage done to the vehicle, including alloys.
All right. Well, you know more about it than I do, and I love the idea of the argument that's used against Extinction Rebellion actually applying to some of the people that use the most polluting vehicles on our streets. That sometimes mythical ambulance that won't be able to get through because of a protest that happens very, very rarely. These vehicles are parking up arrogantly every day of the week. And if you're driving a skip truck, I don't think anyone's going to accuse you of being some sort of muesli-munching, sandal-wearing, do-gooding eco-fascist while you're delivering skips. Is it like driving a scaffolding truck, Andy? Are you the real kings of the road? Do you sort of...
I'm not going to say that. What I will say is that we know how to go backwards properly, but I am half a hippie at heart, so this stuff just aggravates me anyway.
That's interesting.
It's just like ignorance all around. But the biggest point I want to drive home is please park properly, because it doesn't make an odds to me whether I can get through or not. I can get through a very tight gap, but what people don't realise is the fire engines, they will write your car off.
Yeah, they won't worry about it. They'll just nudge through anyway. What's the biggest, apart from other people parking and other vehicles, what is the biggest nightmare for a skip lorry driver? What's the bane of your life? Is it people who do... Is it... Because I'm fascinated by this, Andy. Is it people that do with their skips what I used to do with the salad bar at Pizza Hut? Where you stack the sides up with lettuce to create like a second wall, and then you fill it up with salad, so you've got twice as much salad as you could get in a normal bowl. So people use MDF or something like that to make because that must be quite hard to transport when it's like that. I've often thought
it is, mate. But they're usually half sensible when they've done that. The real people who've got two brain cells both fighting for third place are the people who stick a window at the back of the skip and then fill it up with bricks.
Oh,
they're doing exactly the same thing.
Even I can see the potential problem, and that happens. Yeah, I don't know why I find what you do fascinating. It's like cranes. I just there's something about that interplay between like doing moving heavy stuff. Just I don't know, brings out my inner schoolboy. 30. Take care, Andy. Drive safely. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:35 is the time. Do not adjust your sets. There is a motoring phone-in underway on the James O'Brien Experience. I can't call it the James O'Brien Experience. That sounds ridiculous. On the James O'Brien programme. It's not a pro-motoring phone-in. I'm intrigued by the sort of wokey element of this so-called war on motorists that's supposed to be underway by asking them to drive a little bit more slowly. That's actually extraordinary, isn't it? I'm interested by the psychology of this as much as the detail. Hey, the graph, I don't know if you've ever seen it. The graph that charts the relationship between speed of vehicle and damage done to pedestrian in the event of a collision is extraordinary. And there's another graph as well, which is less extraordinary about SUVs because of where the bull bar sits sometimes on the front of the vehicle and the damage that can do as well in the event of a collision. But the idea that asking people to slow down because it will kill fewer pedestrians is a war on motorists. For students of rhetoric and media manipulation, that's a masterclass, right? The Tories talked about it, a war after they got that unexpected and largely, it's a consequence of misinformation, really, and misleading voters in Uxbridge and Ruislip. They started talking a lot about the war on motorists. What is this war on motorists? What does it involve? It involves making people drive a little bit more slowly, because that way fewer people will die or sustain serious injuries. The injury you will sustain if you're hit by a vehicle going at 20 is considerably less severe than the injury you will sustain or your child will sustain. So what's this war on motorists about? Well, stopping children from being killed in built-up areas. Oh, well, I'm sorry, that's awful. I'm definitely voting against that war on motorists. Down with that. I mean, it's mad, right? These conversations. Maybe we should have a bit of a rethink. It's not so much the motoring phone-in that we're allergic to. It's the way that they're normally conducted. We could come in it from completely the other angle and do God's work. And I guess in a way we are today. Although, can I introduce a side order question? Please, may I? Why are the turnouts so low in Paris for referendums? The last one they had was on banning rental e-scooters, and they did it. So these things actually mean something. They actually happen. Guess what the turnout was for that? So it was a positive vote to ban rental e-scooters from Paris, something that a lot of people in British cities might quite like. I don't know. Guess what the turnout was for that one? Go on, have a guess. I'll give you a clue. Single figures. 8%. So for French people listening, or for people very familiar with France, at risk of indulging in a little bit of national stereotyping, can you just tell me what's going on here? Why are the turnouts so low despite the fact that the results are binding? Is it because of what I believe the correct French word is Is it because French people just are too busy? I don't know. I don't even know what you're doing. You're so busy eating cheese. Why? Why is turnout so low? In London, if they had a vote on banning stuff, I think people would be out in their droves. But not in Paris. So why are the turnouts so low on these referendums that are not only binding for everybody who lives in the city, but also making international news? 0345 60 973. Ross is in Harrogate. Ross, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
So my wife was hit by an SUV last May at very low speed. and she was thrown in the air and landed on the ground, smashed her pelvis, and had to have serious trauma surgery as a result. She's now got 2 very long pins in her in her pelvis. Yeah. Thankfully she's made an incredible recovery. So you would never know it happened now. But yeah, so she was out for a run. She got to a pedestrian crossing. Just at the point, it was on the Green Man, but at that point an ambulance came through with its blue lights flashing, and then she started to step across after that had gone through, but the cars had started to go. So there was no fault for the driver involved. Right. It was just one of those turns of events. But she was hit from the car going at a standing start. So it was going sort of, they think, probably no more than 6-7 miles an hour. Good Lord. And it caused that level of injury. When she got taken to the local hospital, when she got to A&E, they sort of said, "Gosh, you must have been hit at sort of 30-40 miles an hour." She said, "No, it was from a standing start." It was only when she spoke to the trauma specialists in Leeds that they sort of said, "Oh, we're seeing more of this with SUVs." It can be because the bonnet's so high. Because the bonnet's so high, so it hits you in a different way.
Yes, I may have been showing my age a bit when I talked about bull bars. Rick said I work on a farm, James, and I haven't seen a bull bar for 25 years. So I think that was possibly a misspeak. But the height of the bonnet is pertinent to what we're discussing.
That's it. So
there's more car to hit you, isn't there? As well,
there's more car to hit you, and they're like you said, they're very safe for the people in the car. Far deadlier for anyone outside of it.
Had you given it a second thought before this happened?
SUVs?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've never liked them. So we've got 3 young. So the other bizarre thing, we've got 3 small children. They each need a special car seat.
Okay.
Hardly any SUVs can you fit 3 car seats across in the back.
Oh, right.
So we've got a non-SUV. We've got a Citroen Grand Picasso, which you can fit 3 across, and there are a few other models that you can, but hardly any of the SUVs, and they're so wide, and yet you can't fit. So they're not practical either. So there you go. I dislike them for a number of reasons.
Yes, and therefore the idea of, I like what Corpsey has said, it's not a question of pricing them off the road, it's a question of making them even more exclusive than they are already. That's how you sell it, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Exactly.
You don't need to worry if you can't pay. It's a bit like the VAT on school fees argument. No. You're just making it an even bigger privilege, an even greater air of exclusivity around this thing that is already supposedly a mark of privilege and exclusivity. Is your wife fully recovered? Can she sort of do all the things she could do before?
She can. She gets a few aches and pains occasionally if she's doing a bit too much heavy lifting or whatever, which is par for the course with 3 young children. But no, she's made a remarkable recovery, so that's good.
But there's a lesson there, and it's not going to be talked about much because the kind of the ship has sailed, as it were. Back in the day when we used to talk about this on the programme, there was still an air, in my naive, foolish, youthful way. I still thought that if we could get the conversation going enough, then the direction of traffic, if you pardon the pun, the direction of traffic might change. But it certainly hasn't now. So you're going to have to address the problem rather than trying prevention. Now you need cure. And cure is, you want to park in London, you want to park in Paris, that'll be £100. Please, on top of all the other charges that you have to pay, because the whole conversation is about getting cars off the road for the benefit of everybody, except people who consider their sort of droit de seigneur, their God-given right to motor around in a vehicle. George says, I quite like the way you phrase this, George. It's almost as if you can't quite believe what you've done. He goes, I've actually read a paper on this subject. Sounds like you did it by accident. I don't know quite how this happened, James, but I've read a paper on this subject. And they found that SUVs are twice as likely to kill pedestrians than passenger cars, 8 times more likely to kill children, and there's a distinct psychological sense of security provided to the driver that causes them to drive less cautiously and rely on their car for safety rather than their driving. And that is, another reason why we should be dealing with this problem. Grant's in Woking. Grant, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I've only recently started driving. In fact, I only got my first car in November.
How old are you?
I am 34.
That's quite late. Is your wife pregnant?
No. I did live in Bermondsey in South.
So you didn't need a car?
London. didn't need a car.
See, I was 32, Grant, and the only reason I learnt to drive was because Mrs. O'Brien, I felt quite unreasonably, insisted that she wouldn't be able to drive herself to the hospital when she went into labour. So I had to get a driver. So about 3 months into the pregnancy, I had to start driving lessons. Happily, I sailed through first time.
Fantastic. All right, well, I actually passed my test back in 2016.
Okay.
I did it for a job opportunity at the time that fell through, and then because I was living in London at the time,
didn't drive.
Didn't drive. I had no need for it, so moved out into Surrey, and whilst I can get into London nice and easy, getting anywhere outside of Woking, like if we want to go and do anything that isn't in Woking, with all of the rail strikes and everything like that, it's just become a nightmare to try and do anything.
This is turning into a motoring phone in, Grant. I don't want to be rude, but let me nudge you along to the relevant point where we start slagging off SUV drivers.
Yes, so I mean it's just horrifying, right?
Yes, disgusting.
I have a small car. I have a small Fiat 500.
I've done it again. I don't care.
No, I know. Hang on.
Wait, is the Fiat 500 the little cutie one?
It's a little cutie one.
Oh, I do care. They're really lovely. I like those.
They are.
Do you know, with cars like that, I think they should put the steering wheel in the middle.
I think so as well. They're great. They're so much fun. And
like the little smart cars as well. You put the steering wheel in the middle, you could drive it like a Dodgem.
They put a smile on everyone's face.
They do. They're beautiful little vehicles.
They are.
Anyway, back to the SUVs and why the people that drive them are baddies.
Because, right, all of the SUVs, right, are jacked up higher. Yes. SUVs and pickup trucks.
They wouldn't see you. They wouldn't see you. I bet they don't even see you in your little Fiat 500.
Right, so first time I went out to go and pick my partner up from work, one of them almost and I just was not used to pickup trucks and SUVs. I didn't realise because they're so elevated, if you are in a low car, they've got high beams that are just blinding you every time you are driving down the road.
It's just bad for everybody except the people in them. There is literally no benefit. There's no environmental benefit. There's no road benefit. We've heard from a skip driver, so you can't call him a woolly liberal. Well, maybe he is a woolly liberal, but you can't call him a sort of eco-fascist because he's driving a bloody skip lorry, complaining about fire engines and ambulances not being able to get through. Fire engines aren't going to worry about it. Millions of different reasons why this shouldn't happen. There is a very serious reason why we're having this conversation today, because the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, was asked about the referendum in Paris at an event on Friday when he was apologising to the family of Ella Adou Deborah, who died in 2013, aged 9, as a result of London's dirty air. He was apologising on behalf of the Greater London Authority, and Ella's mother, Rosamond, will join us shortly to share a frankly heartbreaking postscript to an already terrible story involving that apology on Friday and that question of pollution. And for just as a slight aside, because it is going to involve online comments, there's been some research done into the 20 mile per hour speed limit that's been introduced in some areas of Wales, mostly built up areas. And it turns out that most Facebook groups opposing it are from people in England. So when I say to you this notion of a war on motorists is bonkers, I don't know that I can exaggerate. It's a Tory thing. You've got people in areas of England where there are 20 mile per hour areas. In fact, the research I'm looking at from Wales Online shows that English Tories opposing 20 mile per hour limits in Wales support them in the areas where they live. It's almost as if it's all organised and they see some sort of wedge issue here that they can use to their own political benefit. So next time you hear someone complaining about speed limits in Wales, just ask them where they live. Chances are it's Macclesfield. It's 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10 to 12, you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You may have heard me say on a couple of occasions towards the end of interviews with people on this programme that if there is ever a time when they want the benefit of the platform that we've built together, you and me, to share something or to draw attention to something, then they will be welcome back into the studio whenever they want. It's not a promise I make very often, but when I do make it, I mean it. And one of the people to whom I have made that promise is Rosamond Adou Deborah, the Clean Air campaigner and mother of Ella Deborah, who died in 2013, aged 9, and became the first person to have their death officially recorded as having been caused by pollution, being caused by dirty air. We will get on shortly to the reason why Rosamond wanted to talk to you today. But before that, we cast our minds back to Friday when Sadiq Khan at an event apologised on behalf of the Greater London Authority to you, Rosamond, and your family for Ella's death. Why did he do that, and why was it important?
James, I think it was important for a number of reasons. Although the coroner ruled in 2020, actually people have been asking me, so who's responsible for her death? And I keep on saying to people all the time, well, use your imagination. And I think really for my twins as well, because my twins were 3 when Ella became ill, and they've lived through this whole thing all their life. And I wanted them to know, your sister was important to you and to many others. And I know how deeply this has affected you. There were 5 when she died. And of course, this is never going to bring it back. But for them, we try and protect our children all the time. And, my very talented young duo, they've had their problems, as you can imagine, with accepting Ella's death. And it was, for me, I can understand it on a different level, but I was very happy for them on Friday.
Because it takes some of the question marks out of their lives. I think therapists use the word closure a lot, don't they?
It does.
It contributes to closure.
It does. And I've always also told them, don't be angry, don't respond to people, continue to be positive. And I think it's important because as parents, we tell our children to say sorry, don't we? And that 5-letter word, it's taken a long time coming. And the government are still yet to apologise. And I think they need to. Although Ella's not here, we will accept an apology on her behalf. She suffered greatly. Her KC says the actual injuries she suffered are similar to torture. So I think, our Prime Minister, he needs to do the decent thing.
Because of the pain she was in, and
Absolutely.
Of course to prevent other children suffering a similar fate. That's not the main reson why you're here today, is it? So tell me why you wanted to shine a light on something rather ugly.
Yeah, my friend Katie messaged me on Friday and said, well done, as your friends do. And she went, I'm really sorry for all those awful comments. So, because I put an actual link to an article on my friend's WhatsApp group. That would tell you I don't read the articles about me. It was there for my friends. But when she said that, I thought, let me go and take a peek at it. And I was expecting it to be one. I've got very broad shoulders doing the kind of work I do. But I think I had triggered some people. And some of the comments, which is terrible. I think I actually had to laugh in the end because there were so many. Just to put it in context, I was born in Whittington Hospital, which isn't that far. And, I don't come from wherever people thought. And, but the stereotyping, which in my time as a teacher, I had to, head of year, you have to put up with stereotyping. The whole thing about benefits, coming to our country. And I thought, you must have the wrong person. Definitely isn't me.
I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because these are generally individuals who don't reveal their real identity. They almost seem to egg each other on to new levels of ignorance and unpleasantness. Can I read a couple?
You can. I'm definitely not going to read it.
No, I don't want you to. But I mean, you mentioned being born in Whittington Hospital and working in the British state education system as a head of year.
Head of sixth form.
Yeah, head of sixth form. So I wonder what her life expectancy would have been, if we're talking about Ella now, if we had not given her mother a free pass into this country with medical expenses all paid. They sure know how to put their hands into the pockets of the citizens of this country. What next? The entitled takes on new dimensions, and they'll start suing British citizens. Maybe she should have moved another one, British and proud. Proud of what is a question for the ages. Maybe she should have moved to a country with cleaner air like China or India. Lots of people die because of asthma who live well away from city centres and so-called air pollution. It's weird she only brings it up after her daughter has died. Then, as ever, there's a line about Sadiq Khan and knife crime, which, of course, has nothing to do with Ella's death. UK is a cold, wet and damp country. It's ironic the lawyers target people from Africa to moan about damp. Lucky to get a roof. Now want better accommodation over our own indigenous. who know about keeping windows open to stop a build-up of damp and mould. Obviously, the pollution that killed Ella was from the vehicular pollution outside. So
emissions.
From emissions. So keeping a window open.
We don't have damp in our house, but thank you.
For this genius, all of a sudden it's a problem for non-Brits. Well, we all know it's the damp UK. And I know you can laugh it off almost all of the time. It depends, doesn't it, on if you're feeling a bit down about other things and this stuff beeps up on your radar. It can just nip under the most robust of self-defences. But I know you worry about the twins seeing this stuff.
I do. On a serious note, next week will be 11 years that Ella died. And I actually did speak to them about this because they're now at the age
where they're going to see it.
They're going to see it. And I thought, you need to raise it, because the first thing that they're going to say to you when they read it is, Mum, please stop doing what you do. And I'm desperate to get Ella's law through so that all of us will have a right to breathe clean air. And I did apologise to them yet again for such vile comments, especially the ones about their late sister. Ultimately will be the ones that impact them.
Well, nothing says patriotic Brit like maligning the memory of a dead schoolgirl, does it, Rosamond?
Yeah, but thank you for having it. But I know this is a minority of people. And just to say, I am not involved in the culture war. I'm just fighting for clean air. I need to make that very, 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 very clear. There might be many involved in it. And for people who really have an issue with my colour, there's nothing I can do about it, nor will I ever apologise about that, I'm afraid.
It's extraordinary, really, reading some of it. And do they understand when you explain this to them?
Absolutely, but I have to explain it to them because they get very upset about it. I think it's definitely about their late sister, and I understand that as their mother. But it's rather unfortunate. But thank you for giving me the platform to address it.
I told you can have it whenever you want. Where are we on the law? What's the latest?
We're going to have a second reading on 14th of June. And I urge the government, again, please do what the coroner asks. The waiting list in the NHS is heading to 8 million. And as we now know, every single organ in the human body is impacted by air pollution. So you need to do more.
And yet this is the government that keeps talking about a war on motorists.
Well, they think it's going to earn them a few votes. You know, I've been reading your book.
Have you? Oh, Lord.
How They Broke Britain.
Yes. You're not supposed to laugh. It's a very serious book, Rosamond. How dare you?
I've been reading chapter 9.
Okay.
It has special interest to me.
I'll let people find out for themselves why that might be. Rosamond Adu-Kissi-Debrah, CBE, clean air campaigner, and of course mother of Ella Kissi-Debrah, who died in 2013 as a result, according to the coroner, as a result of London's dirty air, or so-called air pollution, as Billy Buncher-Numbers with a picture of a bulldog on his internet avatar prefers to call it. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me,
James. I will
James.
apologise on behalf of other people for the abuse that you and your family continue to endure from the darker recesses of the internet. The time now is 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. The longer Abdul Azadi, the suspected Clapham chemical attacker, and before you waste tuppence texting me, you have to say suspected, because no arrests have been made, no charges have been brought yet, and certainly no convictions have been secured. So the longer he remains at large, the clearer it becomes, I would argue, or the more likely it becomes that people are actually helping him evade the authorities, which is extraordinary when you think about it. But the one element of this story that I'm a little bit worried about, I mean, I'm worried about every element of the story, not least the rise in these sort of chemical attacks. I interviewed Katie Piper once, who's probably the most prominent victim of this kind of crime, and she sort of gave me a crash course, really, in that level of misogyny. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms before, but usually when men, it does two things. It objectifies a woman. It reduces her to her physical appearance. It reduces her to her looks, and then that is the thing that the man is attacking. It is, I think, on the same page as if I can't have you, then no one else will. So it is pure misogyny. Not just violent and awful, but pure misogyny in the most obvious of ways. And the fact that he had committed a sex crime, being convicted of a sex crime, and then received asylum. Even those of us who are supremely relaxed about immigration in general, or actually understand what the refugee crisis looks like, there are clearly cases that are egregious. The problem, I mean, there's a million problems with this story, and we'll get on to the element that we're having shortly. But the most obvious problem is it lets politicians off the hook. Isn't it extraordinary that you've got two previous Home Secretaries, Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, trying to use this case to make political capital? I mean, all the Tories are trying to use it to make political capital about immigration in general and asylum applications in particular. They have been in charge for 14 years. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary that the failure, the backlog, or what they've renamed the backlog, I think, this week. That there is nothing illiberal or fascistic about a system which determines people aren't allowed to stay here or shouldn't be here and removing them. That is not left versus right. That is rules versus anarchy. When they make the rules disgusting, or when they take away anybody's right to get here, including people who are desperate for our protection, then it is fascistic. When you have Suella Braverman being asked in a select committee by a fellow Conservative MP how somebody escaping, for example, a terrible situation, a war, persecution, famine in a country where with which we don't have any form of arrangement at the moment. If you ask Suella Braverman what a legal route, in fact, can we dig that clip out? It was Tim Loughton asking her, because this doesn't get played often enough. They make all this noise about it, but deep down they know there's no safe route. These people can't get into. No, so, by all means say we don't want another kinder transport. We don't want anybody coming from anywhere, but be honest about it. Don't pretend that there are safe and legal routes. But there's nothing illiberal or unpleasant about saying if you have come here for asylum and you have committed a sex crime, your asylum application is over. Once the conviction is in place, the application is over. Then you've got other problems, such as where do you send somebody? You can't deport people to an unsafe country, but equally, you can't expect to stay here if you have committed a crime while applying for asylum. Once your application has been accepted, you've got the same rights that I've got. And that is absolutely how it should be. We don't have second and first class citizens in this country. Once you're a citizen, once you've got a right to remain, that's it. There's no talk about being guests or hosts or any of that nonsense. I appreciate not everybody understands that or agrees with it, but the alternative is some sort of caste system whereby you've got more rights according to how many branches there are on your family tree, and that would be ridiculous. So there's a lot going on with this story, and the sight of right-wing politicians who have been in charge of immigration policy and in charge of the asylum system for 14 years, trying to use it to score some sort of political point, or indeed right-wing commentators who've been cheerleading for every Conservative Prime Minister since David Cameron. And you almost get a prize now if you can name them all in a row. But should we try David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, all of them? It's not a Tory paper in the country that hasn't been cheerleading for every single one of them, and they've done nothing on the. So even if, like me, you don't think it's the biggest problem that the country's facing, if you do think it's one of the biggest problems that the country's facing, if you've swallowed the snake oil, you've been distracted from the state of the NHS, you've been distracted from austerity, you've been distracted from the fact that nurses are using food banks, you've been distracted from the fact that the most common reason why a child goes to hospital in this country now is to have a rotten tooth extracted, you've been distracted from the cost of living, you've been distracted from the fact that the Brexit they promised you would be brilliant is costing you a fortune. You've been distracted from the fact that you might not be able to pay your mortgage. As a Tory MP who says he can't live on 120 grand a year because his mortgage, a Tory MP, because his mortgage, you've been distracted from all of that, and you're obsessed with immigration, or you're obsessed with small boats, you're obsessed with refugees. It's the politicians that have been in charge for 14 years you should be angry with. Extraordinary to me that they've got the brass neck to pretend that this is an issue that they should be trusted with. So appealing to sometimes xenophobic voters, sometimes even racist voters, sometimes just frightened voters. People like Braverman and Priti Patel and honest Bob Jenrick saying they've all had jobs in the bloody Home Office, these people. It's Rosamund kindly and somewhat embarrassingly mentioned my book at the end of that interview a moment ago. But the point I make repeatedly in How They Broke Britain, which hasn't come back into the Sunday Times bestsellers 3 months after publication by accident, is because people are talking about it and telling each other about it and recommending it. Because I'll tell you for nothing, it's not going to get much coverage in the media that gets absolutely lambasted on almost every page. That's what they do. They let nonsense pass. They let people who are responsible for a problem campaign on a platform promising to fix the problem they're responsible for. It's absolutely extraordinary. Extraordinary. And they know the truth. That's the point. They know the truth. I'm going to play you this, but what we're going to talk about is actually the Christian element of this character's asylum application. And again, Braverman and Patel now queuing up to condemn people who are converting to Christianity, claiming it's some sort of easy pass. But here is Suella Braverman being quizzed by Tim Lawton at the Home Affairs Select Committee only in November of 2022. And this should really be played every time she opens her mouth in public. This and the time she claimed that there wouldn't be a bill to pay to the European Union in the event of leaving the European Union. That this is the point of my book. They lie. And they lie and they lie again. And if they don't get called out for it, they will lie again and again and again and again. So here's Suella Braverman on the subject of how you can come here as a genuine refugee in a manner that would have to be described by people like her as, quote, legal, end quotes.
Just a bit of role play. I'm a 16-year-old orphan from an East African country escaping a war zone and religious persecution. And I have a sibling legally in the United Kingdom at the moment. What is a safe and legal route for me to come to the United Kingdom?
Well, we have... you're fleeing which country, sorry?
Any African country.
Any African country. Well...
Be any continent, but let's say any African country. I don't want to name one because then their Prime Minister might have a go at me for demonising their population. So let's just theoretically talk about an African country which is going through a period of turbulence and which is persecuting its citizens, including an innocent 16-year-old like me.
Well, we have an asylum system and people can put in applications for asylum.
How would I do that?
Well, you can do it through the safe and legal routes that we have. We have offered 390,000 places to people seeking safety from various countries around the world.
I'm not Syrian, I'm not Afghan, I'm not Ukrainian, not any of those specific schemes. The Dub scheme is historic. What scheme's open to me?
Well, if you are able to get to the UK, you are able to put in an application for asylum.
But I would only enter the UK illegally then, wouldn't I?
Well, that would, if you put in your application for asylum upon arrival, that would be the process that you enter.
How could I arrive in the UK if I didn't have permission to get onto an aircraft legally to arrive in the UK?
Let me just invite other colleagues if there's anything they want to add.
I mean, you could engage with UNHCR. I mean, depending which country you're from, you could engage with UNHCR, and that would be a way of getting leave to enter the UK in order to put in an asylum claim. But I accept that there are some countries where that would not be possible.
I think the point is that there's a shortage of safe and legal routes, other than for specific groups of people that we have generously offered safe haven to.
It's extraordinary. I know that it's a bit depressing that other people don't point this out on a regular basis, but she didn't pause. She came out of that meeting, carried on with precisely the same rhetoric about illegals and about illegal routes when there aren't any legal ones for a huge number of people, quite possibly facing genuine persecution. So, listen, I count three. I count three constituencies of people here. People who didn't understand, didn't know that was the case when they arrived at the conclusion that everybody coming here should be stopped, and now realise that Suella Braverman is a large part of the problem and certainly not the solution. Then you've got people who did understand it all and who grasped the unpleasantness of her position, from the start. And then you've got the people that she's appealing to, the people who now, whether they knew or didn't know before she admitted there in select committee that there are no safe routes for people like the one Tim Lawton described, they don't care. That's the Faragist rump of this country. That's the people that Braverman and Patel are now squabbling over. The people who will say, no, I don't want anyone to come here. I don't care if he's escaping religious persecution in some East African country. I don't want him to come here. And you need to understand that to understand some of the coverage of this scumbag, this alleged scumbag, Abdullah Zaidi. You need to understand the desperation these people have to portray everybody who has come here from overseas and or everybody who has applied for asylum as being a wrong 'un. It reminds me of a story of a BBC worker who has thankfully been sacked after sharing horrific anti-Semitic social media posts. She talks about a hollow hoax, which for me should be a criminal offence. She talks about Ashkenazis. She talks about Jewish people being an invader, colonizer species. So she is taking, in this event perhaps, she's taking the activities of the Israeli government, some of the more excessive activities of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, and using it to malign and to attack an entire body of people. Everybody with a Jewish heritage is guilty of these sins. And you see the same thing happening in a socio-political way with stories like this one. Everybody who is an asylum seeker is a potential chemical attacker. And that's what they do, and they do it very deliberately. Very deliberately. And it's important that some of us try to explain this stuff, because the politicians rely upon the voters not understanding it. Because you're never going to win with that constituency over there who don't want anybody coming here ever anyway, and who will jump on board and accept with alacrity the invitation to pretend that everybody, I mean, you heard some of the messages that Rosamond has to put up with. Everybody who is not, I don't know, not white, whatever the phrase is, indigenous tribes of Northern Europe or whatever racist nonsense you're coming out with this week, that you've got their votes in your back pocket. The votes they're going after are the people that fall for the lie that your ethnicity or your country of origin is somehow an indicator of your character. And that's where the religion comes in. So I've got a horrible feeling, because it's a tough pill to swallow. But if you are going to protect people who face religious persecution in their home countries, then do you also have to protect people who are lying about it? 0345 606 0973. I stopped mentioning my own faith on the programme a while ago for two reasons. One was that it wobbles. It's currently, I lost another very, very close friend recently, and let's just say that it's currently very much in reverse gear, and it comes and goes, and it's not that interesting to you. But the other reason that I stopped mentioning my faith on the programme was because I noticed that all the people in public life who do mention their faith never live by the messages that their faith preaches or teaches. You know, I read about Jacob Rees-Mogg being a prominent Catholic, and I read what Jesus had to say about looking after the poor, or indeed looking after the persecuted, looking after the meek. And I think, well, that's a very different Bible from the one that he's read. So I don't do it anymore for those reasons. And yet, on this subject, I can't see what you do. So this character here, the suspected Clapham chemical attacker, his asylum should have ended the minute he was convicted of two sex offences 3 years earlier. Absolutely, regardless of whether or not he then converted to Christianity. But we're heading towards a really, really tricky question that we've never asked before on the programme. How can you prove you're a Christian? 0345 606 0973. I remember an attack on the London Underground, I think it was, and it appeared to be an Islamist attack, I think. And there's a Muslim lad going by who shouts at the attacker, "You ain't no Muslim, bruv." Do you remember that? Because there's no way you could do those things if you were really abiding by the teachings of that faith. And you could shout at this character, "You ain't no Christian, bruv." How are you going to prove it? And can you protect people from genuine religious persecution without also providing sanctuary to people who are pretending? You could call it a loophole almost, and you can guarantee that people like Braverman and Patel and honest Bob Jenrick will be promising to close the loophole that they did absolutely nothing to fix during their years in the Home Office. So don't fall for their crud. But do get stuck into this question. What are you going to do? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 22 minutes after 12. It's a very, very strange question, this. And it is a potentially quite dangerous one. But it is pertinent because I've just noticed that the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, rather than making a child murderer famous, a child murderer who murdered a child because she wanted to be famous, the Daily Telegraph helped make her famous on Saturday. Today their front page is 40 barge migrants convert to Christianity. We're already seeing the Archbishop of Canterbury come up under regular attack from right-wing politicians for essentially expressing Christian doctrines, and now the historical tradition of celebrating as a Christian when somebody finds their way into the fold is being turned into an enormous negative. But the likelihood of somebody swinging the lead about a conversion to Christianity in order to secure an asylum application does not strike me as slim. It seems to me to be a very plausible loophole, if you like, in the system. Okay? But I am not going to use that loophole to try to make you hate all asylum seekers or mistrust all asylum seekers or believe that they're all liars in the way that some right-wing politicians do. The dangerous question is, and I don't know in the first instance whether I will confine this to Christians. No, anyone really, perhaps, of religious faith. Or is that silly? Shall I just let anybody answer? I'll tell you what, I'll let anyone answer this question, so don't hold back on ringing in. I'll just read you this very quickly. I must be being stupid, but why does religion or conversion have any bearing on seeking asylum? You're not being stupid at all. It's quite hard to believe that there are countries where simply being known to follow a certain faith could get you persecuted. If, for example, a Uyghur Muslim was able to escape from a camp in China and make their way here, then we would not send them back because as a Uyghur in China, they face terrible persecution. I mentioned a moment ago a story in our own country today at the actual BBC, a woman called Dawn Las Cuevas, who was working as a scheduler at BBC Three and posted virulently anti-Semitic material. That attitude, the attitudes that she... Dawn Cuevas, her name is, the attitudes that she espouses, if they were shared by a government, and, for example, the Iranian government might share some of them, that would be a reason not to send a Jewish person back to Iran or back to a country that persecutes people for their religious beliefs. It's not alien. You know, in this country, it's only 400-500 years since we were burning people at the stake in public for believing in the wrong sort of Christianity. Elizabeth followed Mary onto the throne. Mary had been burning Protestants and Elizabeth started burning Catholics. So it's human. It's a human thing. But here's the problem. As I usually get these things right. In fact, speaking of predictions, I must remind you of one I made on Friday that came true this morning. But I usually get this stuff right when it comes to predicting what the amoral right-wing politicians will do next. They're going to start using conversion as an attack line, because some people will lie about it, quite possibly including the character that the police are still searching for. So how on earth could someone prove that they were Christian? And I think to make things interesting, we'll include Jacob Rees-Mogg in this conversation because he is, I'm constantly told, a prominent Catholic. He likes to tweet scriptural references. He likes to refer to his sort of Peter and Jane understanding of the Bible. And yet he votes routinely for the persecution of the poor. He votes routinely for the opposite of what I have always understood to be Christian values. So how on earth would somebody prove they were a Christian? Initially, in the context of an asylum application, 0345 6060 973, and possibly, if there's time and space, in the context of a politician seeking your votes by claiming Suella Braverman is supposed to be a Buddhist, who I thought were taught to be nice to everybody. possibly being a bit shallow on my understanding of Buddhism. So how would you do it? Let's get the phone lines open. 0345 60 60 973. Think about it. How would you do it? Because if you can't do it, then I think you've got to give the benefit of the doubt to some people. All they'd have to prove is that they come from a country where Christians are routinely persecuted. And there aren't that many countries in that category, but there are enough for it to be pertinent to this particular problem. So how are you going to do it? Shay's in Acton. Shay, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I'm in this weird position where my mum was an immigration judge for sort of like 25 years. So I've seen how it works in person. I've been to many courts, and I'm also, there's problems with the word, but I would consider myself to be a Christian. I go regularly in Chiswick. And I know that for a lot of vicars, obviously, this story of conversion and for the church is really good to see. And I've seen some genuine ones from countries like Iran, where people have come and are Christians, and it's really difficult for them to be sent back. It would be very, very difficult for them to go back. Yeah. But I have actually been worried about this for a while, because I do think sometimes in churches and with Christians, we want to see that story of conversion, and it's great, but I'm not sure that much discernment is being used in certain churches, as in actually really looking at the character of that person over a long period of time. I think it's a very nice, great story to kind of latch onto immediately.
You need to know a little bit about the sort of evangelizing nature of Christianity to understand how that could happen, don't you? I mean, it's a huge win in the context of it's when we used to send people all over the world, Shay, trying to convert people to Christianity, and we didn't actually pay that much attention to whether they were telling us the truth or not when they told us they had been converted.
Exactly. And I get the want to see that. I really do. And some of them genuinely, I believe, hand on heart, are genuine.
So how are we going to do it then? How are we going to police it, for want of a better word?
Because I think that vicars need to, in a weird sort of way, almost have a bit of training. I would love, actually, if they went to the asylum and immigration court and had seen as much as I have. Because my parents also are Christians, and my mum, having been an asylum and immigration judge for 20 years, would be much more sceptical.
Yes, I can well believe it.
Obviously, my mum would definitely not believe all the stories.
But could she say that in court? Could she say in court, I know that you say you've converted to Christianity, but I don't believe you? I don't think she could she?
No, she could. Sometimes she refused cases on that basis. She did, yeah. She did, yeah, because you'd have to...
So what criteria... It's a shame she's... no offence, Shay, but it's a shame she hasn't rung in. What criteria... What criteria would she use?
So you would obviously, a bit like, if you were, when you came to her courts, if you wanted to prove that you were in a homosexual relationship, and that was the reason why you couldn't go back to your country of origin, you'd have to have text messages, letters, proof of a relationship. That's different
from proving a religious belief, though. I get that. I understand the sexual relationship bit of it.
Religious belief, you'd have to prove, look, do you go to a church? Does your vicar know you? Have you been part of the congregation? Have you been participating? All of those things.
I can do all that. I can do all that.
Yes, which is why I'm saying the issue is the discernment of the vicars, because a lot of vicars came into court.
That's it. You can't use discernment as a get out of jail free card. If you were the vicar, what would you do? Because I've been coming for 2 years now. I've got all my stamps. I've got all my stamps. I've learned that, and I've learned the other, and I know that I've done 10 Hail Marys, and I know my way around the Psalms. And so, what are you going to do to prove that I'm swinging the lead?
Honestly, it's really tricky.
No, that's not an answer. I'm sorry. This is the Spanish Inquisition. You might not have been expecting it, but that's not good enough. You need to give me the answer. You couldn't do it.
Well, do you know what I'm going to say? Which is going to sound really weird.
No, I don't.
I think you should pray about it.
Who, me?
No. I think the vicar should pray about it. No, I think the vicar should.
That is what you've unintentionally done. Very unintentionally, but from my purposes, very effectively done, is prove my point. Because ultimately, you're saying it comes down to a conversation with God, which means you haven't got a hope in hell or heaven of proving that somebody in the dot is lying to you.
I'm being slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I do think that...
Well, then I'm going to pull you up again then. You can't be tongue-in-cheek. It's a really simple question. How are you going to prove that the person in front of you, who's been going to church for 2 years, they've made their communion, they've done their confirmation, they're devout, they clean the church every Wednesday, they are... absolutely at the front of the queue when it comes to helping out at the local food bank, but they're lying about being a Christian. In their heart of hearts, they don't even believe in God, like a lot of people who go to church for that matter. Deep down, they don't believe it all, but they are doing it in order to get their asylum application over the line. How are you going to prove it?
Well, if they were that committed.
Why can't you just say I can't? Why won't you just say I can't prove it?
You can't, because I think because I've genuinely seen somewhere. I genuinely believe it.
Why won't you just say I can't prove it? Nobody can, because it's faith.
It's not this. It is, yeah. You can't
any more than you can prove that God exists. You can't prove that that person doesn't believe in them, and that's why, as long as genuine religious persecution exists, we as a civilized, ostensibly still Christian society should lean towards the benefit of the doubt, however hard that is for some racists, and I categorically not talking about you now when I use that phrase, however hard that is for some racists or some people appealing to racists like Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, however hard it is for them to swallow. The time is 12:33. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:37 is the time. Leonard is being a bit cheeky. He says, once we've worked out how you can tell whether or not an asylum seeker's claim to be Christian is true, we could apply the same to all the parents trying to get their children into Church of England schools. Leonard, that's outrageous, mate. Catholics do it too. Lucas is in Berlin. Lucas, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome aboard. It's not a great phone line, Lucas. I don't know if we can do something about that.
Let's try to improve it, maybe. I mean, it's just a geographical distance, but maybe it's just better.
No, that can't be it. Go on, carry on. No, I've got an echo. I can't deal with echoes. Sorry, my friend. We'll try and get you back up in a minute. Don't put me on speaker. If I wasn't on speaker when you spoke to the producer and you put me on speaker now, that might be the reason. Stephen's in Tower Hamlets. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm just ringing up to say my brother, who had 2 children who are now adults now, we went to Catholic schools in Ireland, but I know he wasn't really a sort of a Christian or a Catholic, but he, after years of not going to church, went back to church to get them through school, and he was a photographer, and
loads of people. What? I mean, that's not the question. It's a helpful side order, which we touched on a moment ago. But what would you have done? I mean, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, Stephen. But how would you prove? How could he have? How could you have proved that he was swinging the lead?
I just do. He told me.
I know, but how would you prove it?
You can't. You absolutely just can't prove it.
So how are we going to do it in the asylum system?
You can't. I'm ringing up to say that's you just cannot prove it.
So what we do is that people like Suella Braverman and Priti Patel are edging us ever closer towards saying, I don't care if you are a Christian facing persecution, you can sod off back to where you came from.
Yeah. No, I think they're just evil people, and they're. Yeah, it's just a sad situation.
But it worked. Your brother got his kids into the school.
He did, yeah, and he did a lot of effort into it. He did Santa's Grotto. He was
that's not very Christian. That's what you mean, Santa's Grotto. It's supposed to be the nativity.
Oh no! Every Christmas he'd do Santa's Grotto and take photographs and just get in with the Catholic priests and just get brownie points. So it is. It's not just immigrants doing it. It's just everybody just who wants to.
Well, this is the mad thing, really. Actually. I keep alluding to the Spanish Inquisition lightheartedly because of the Monty Python stuff. But of course, that's what they did, the search for heretics, to prove that you are a true believer. And eventually they would torture you until you admitted that you were not a true believer. They literally would torture you. They'd pull your fingernails out or they'd put you on a rack until eventually you said, all right, I'm not a proper Christian. And far be it from me to suggest that sometimes Suella Braverman gives the impression of being a human being who'd be perfectly comfortable with the idea of putting other people on a rack or pulling out their fingernails. But short of the Spanish Inquisition, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? And if you can't prove it, you can't deny the existence of religious persecution. If you think it doesn't exist, if you think people aren't possessed of vile views, go and read up on the BBC employee who's been fired after sharing horrific anti-Semitic social media posts. Or just look at what happens to Uyghur Muslims in China, or have a look at what happens to other religions in other parts of the world. You can't deny the existence of religious persecution. Therefore, you could probably make a case if you've converted after you got here, it doesn't count. But that would be in direct contravention of all Christian teaching. So eventually you're going to end up asking, if you start playing them using similar tactics to the ones they deploy, somebody's going to have to ask Suella Braverman and Priti Patel why they hate Christianity. And you see what an ugly dog whistle that would be. But at some point, if you want to beat these people, you've got to... Well, what do? Do you come down to their level? When they go high, when they go low, we go high? But what's wrong with Christianity? People are ringing in and suggesting that people are given pork to test their faith. And that's brutal. So you're suggesting that deep down so you're presuming that they were of the Muslim faith to start with, or the Jewish faith. So force-feeding people claiming to be Christians pork to prove that they're actually Jewish or actually Muslims. What about the vegetarians, bruv? What about the vegans? Anne's in Sutton. Anne, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I'm so excited because I've waited so long to be equipped to talk about something with you.
Whoa, that's big talk, Anne.
I know. You're probably going to prove me wrong in seconds.
I doubt it.
But I really just ringing to say you can't prove it. As soon as you start to try, you're going against the absolute basic truth of the gospel, which is that you're saved by faith and not by works. We'd hope. I've been a Christian for many years, and born again, not denominational.
Yes.
And the basic principle is that when you come to know Jesus, it will change you. It will make a difference. But the degree of difference and the length of time it takes for that is just not quantifiable. And you can't then say to someone, well, there's no evidence.
No, and when some people, it can happen in a nanosecond, like St. Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. And for some people, it can take years.
So the price we pay for Christianity in this country is giving liars the benefit of the doubt in some contexts, whether it's trying to get your child into school or whether it's letting someone apply for asylum.
Absolutely. And I guess that is a heavy price to pay. And
Potentially it is. I mean, the massive majority of people who might claim to be Christian to get their child into a school or indeed to claim asylum are not going to turn out to be vicious, misogynistic, violent criminals.
No, absolutely. I mean, although it's unfair. But the bigger issue of immigration, I'm so surprised. It's just come on like a light bulb to me. Why it suddenly becomes such a big deal, because I can't believe people haven't kind of caught on to it before. It's such a brilliant in to being a genuine asylum seeker.
Well, it's still quite... I mean, you'd still have to jump through quite a lot of hoops. You would have to go to church for a while. You would have to have a vicar who was on side. You would have to have... But again, the stakes are much lower when you're trying to get your child into a faith school. But there are similar levels of scepticism, and not every parent succeeds, even if they have been going to church for 6 months.
But in theory, I've been for a long period of time where I never went to church. I've been to church. I've done all stops in between. And in theory, whether you're saved or not, whether you know Jesus, whether you accept his payment for your sins, that is not proven by going to church either.
No, I'd have to be able to read your mind. I'd have to be able to indulge in some sort of extrasensory perception, and you put it beautifully. Highlight the problem, of course. What would Jesus' teaching be on people coming here from elsewhere anyway, Anne?
Well, I would say it's a big one, but
it's
I would
not
say
really.
On the whole, well, it is and it isn't.
It isn't.
I always say, if you've got a life raft, this is me, not Jesus.
No, well, I'm more interested in Jesus. What was the point of the parable of the Good Samaritan?
He would say, welcome them in.
Thank you, Anne, and amen.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. It's a little... you can just wheedle them out, can't you? It's really not difficult. How many more do you think we could take, James? We can't take them all. How would our infrastructure cope with the most densely populated country in the Western Hemisphere? Well, we're not. Would be the short answer to that. But this isn't a conversation about immigration. See, even people... You can hear a dog whistle, mate. You're so bent by xenophobia, you can hear a dog whistle when there's not even anyone blowing them. This is a conversation about how someone can prove they're a Christian, whether they're trying to get married in a church, send their child to a faith school, or have their asylum application expedited because they'd be persecuted in their country of origin. It's not a conversation about immigration, but you spend so long on Facebook, everything is about immigration for you. Off the top of my head, Monaco, Malta, the Vatican City, the Channel Islands are more densely populated than the United Kingdom is. I don't think internationally. I'm pretty sure the UK is not in the top. Netherlands. Where do you read this stuff? Where do you get it from? These non-existent statistics. It's incredible. 10-1 is the time. How are you going to prove it? David's in Manchester. David, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I think it's total diversion. I think that. The test for Christianity, it made me think of the West Wing. It may sound strange, but
no, they do incredible critiques of Christianity. They do the Leviticus one better than anybody, me included, don't they? When he's asking the woman how she feels about slavery and wearing cloth next to silk, cotton next to silk, and all that.
Absolutely. There was one where there was this exact issue where some refugees came over and they were claiming Christianity. And I think the episode was called Shibboleth.
Oh, yeah.
And he asked them about it, and the Jeb Bartlett went through and did a test. But obviously we can't do that with everybody. But one of the issues is that we have to rely on the best judgment of the individual border officer. But I think this is, yet again, a small number of people, and we rely on the individual officer that's dealing with it at the time. But the Tories will grasp any individual issue to divert from the main problem we've got, which is their complete destruction of the asylum system.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? So in the same way that one alleged chemical attacker can be used by these people to malign every single asylum seeker ever, so it is that one asylum seeker who's swinging the lead about Christianity is proof that they are all liars. Or 30 or 50 of them swinging. They're all liars, exactly. And they're all chemical attackers. I don't know. I mean, why don't people just say it out loud? Why are they constantly nibbling away in the margins? Yeah. That's what they want to believe, and that's what they're trying to sell to the British public, because the alternative is to say, well, we've been in charge for 14 years and we've screwed everything up completely.
But it wasn't so long ago that we had Conservative MPs standing up in Parliament saying we don't just need to look after Muslims or other people, we need to be looking after Christians in other countries.
Yeah, but not that kind. They didn't mean that kind of Christian, David.
Exactly. We didn't mean the actual ones that might actually turn up.
I suppose if you asked Jacob Rees-Mogg to prove he was a Christian, then he would be able to point to acts of charity, acts of devotion, voting against the whip in order to protect poor people. He in his defence would be able to point to lots of things that proved he lived by Jesus' teachings. But for someone who's only been here for a couple of years, it would be much harder to point to a lifetime of goodness and kindness and charity, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. It doesn't. The facts and the issues, the diversion, the deflecting from the 14 years of failure.
And people want to be deflected from it because they love it deep down. They're just not quite ready yet. I always think of Steve Bannon when he said, wear your accusation of racism proudly. They're still not quite ready to do it. But if the Tories lose the next election, then it will be a battle between the ones who are and the ones who aren't. Wear your accusation of racism proudly. I can't do it proudly, so I'm going to pretend that all asylum seekers are chemical attackers, or I'm going to pretend that they're all lying. All Christians are liars. Why do you hate Christians, Suella Braverman? What's wrong with Christians? I don't hate all Christians. I just hate the ones who are lying about it. Okay, how do you tell the difference? I'll wait. See the problem? Now, if you like it, that's fine. I can't help you. I've done my best. I can't reach you. You love it. You hate them all. You love the politicians telling you to hate them all, giving you permission to hate them all. But if you don't and you're falling for it, if you're savable, ask Suella Braverman to tell you how she tells the difference between a Christian who's telling the truth and a Christian who isn't. And if she can't, ask her why she hates Christians so much. Or would that be unfair? I don't know. And speaking of Conservatives, I don't like to boast, but I did mention a moment. That's a lie, obviously. I love to boast. In fact, I should try to do it less. I mentioned a moment ago while speaking to Anne that I'm not psychic. You'd need to be psychic in order to do this. Well, I sometimes think I might be. I don't know whether you've seen the coverage today of widespread fears that Rishi Sunak's whiz-bang childcare proposals are going to descend into complete chaos. It was reported that Gillian Keegan had similar fears. She's already tried to wash her hands of some of the responsibility by saying she's not responsible for all the bits of it. Now, today is Monday. On Friday, no one was talking about it. Well, not quite no one. 2 months before it's due to start suggests to me that we've got another epic fail on the horizon, haven't we? We've got another huge disaster on our horizon. And you open your newspapers today, and lo and behold, there are warnings that we've got another epic fail on the horizon. Although, to be fair, they didn't use that language. Back to church. John's in Ruislip. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Basically, as I mentioned, I'm a member of the PCC Parish Council congregation in Earls Court, and we are a part of the HTB Church B community. We have about 60 to 70 immigrants mostly from Iran attending our church, yeah? But on Monday, we have 150 of them coming to church. We have a charity which offers them haircuts, nails, clothes, and all that. So in the last 18 months, about 29 of them, mostly women, and are men as well, but only few, and children, they convert into Christianity, they get baptized in the church, and they are, for the last 18 months, systematically in the church. We had an alpha course in Farsi for their own language, because mostly are from Iran. And I must say that you can see how the life is transformed of those women. However, if you put me at the current point today, I cannot confirm 100% the genuine motives. You know what I'm saying?
No, well, exactly. But how could you? How could anybody?
Exactly. There's the catch. There's the catch. Yes, of course, they sometimes ask for the letters from the church to confirm that for the assignment officer that they are part of the congregation, and the church happily provides it. And during my 20 years of being in the church and part of the community and the leading staff, I saw different cases. It's true, people come and abuse the system, as they does in all the systems.
But how do you know they're abusing the system?
Yeah, because I saw over the 20 years many people claiming,
but how do you know?
They win the case and then they went away from the church.
No, they might still be praying in private.
Maybe, I don't know.
You don't know. You can't see into their soul, John.
I can't. It's true, but you can see as well how the.
And how can you punish? You can't punish the ones telling the truth because of the existence of the ones who aren't.
That's true as well. But what I want to say, love and faith as a church, as a community and follower of Jesus, we just carry on that. And I understand your point. And other callers who are angry.
It's a tricky one. Thank you, John. Last word to Tamara. It has to be very brief, actually, Tamara. Sheila's just come in. What would you like to say?
Well, as somebody with a legal background, I would say very simply, if you can't prove something, then this shouldn't be a factor at all in assessing asylum seeker status.
Good God.
It should
remind me never to come to a lawyer like you. The fact that you can't prove it is how people get killed for their religious faith. It's why the Spanish Inquisition would pull out your fingernails until you said that you were actually a heretic. People are persecuted for their Christianity, usually by people who rely upon the fact that you can't prove you're not. Have you never heard of the Salem witch trials? Have you never heard of The Crucible by Arthur Miller? It's precisely because the people who would persecute thrive upon the inability to prove something that these problems exist. But good luck to your clients. I'll say a prayer for them. It's coming up to 11:59. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.